In a small town nestled in the heart of the Midwest, where fields stretched endlessly and life moved at a slower pace, 19-year-old Maya Johnson was making waves. She wasn't loud or flashy, far from it, but her quiet determination and sharp mind set her apart. Growing up in a tight-knit community, Maya had always been aware of the challenges faced by people who looked like her. Her parents worked tirelessly to provide for their family, teaching Maya and her younger brother the value of hard work and resilience. But they also taught her something else: the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it feels like the whole world is against you. Maya was a college freshman studying political science, a field she chose because she wanted to make a difference. From a young age, she'd watched the news with her father, listening as he explained the complexities of politics and social justice. One day, her dad would say, "You'll be the one changing things." Those words stayed with Maya, fueling her dreams of becoming an advocate for marginalized communities. She envisioned herself speaking at rallies, drafting policies, and fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves. For now, though, she focused on her studies, attending lectures, writing papers, and participating in campus discussions about equality and reform. On this particular evening, Maya decided to attend a community forum on police reform. The event was being held at the local library, a modest brick building that served as a hub for town meetings and book clubs alike. Flyers had been posted around campus and throughout the neighborhood, urging residents to come and share their thoughts. Maya knew these forums were important. They gave ordinary people a chance to voice their concerns directly to leaders, but she hadn't planned to go until a friend convinced her. "You're always talking about making change," her friend said. "Why not start here?" The room buzzed with energy when Maya arrived. Rows of folding chairs were arranged in front of a small stage, where a panel of speakers sat ready to address the crowd. Among them was City Councilman James Alden, a man whose name carried weight in the town. He was tall and impeccably dressed, with slicked back hair and a confident smile that made him appear approachable, at least on the surface. But beneath his polished exterior lay a reputation marred by controversy. Whispers of corruption and abuse of power followed him wherever he went, though nothing had ever stuck. To many, Alden represented everything wrong with the system: privilege, arrogance, and a blatant disregard for accountability. As the forum began, tensions quickly rose. Residents took turns stepping up to the microphone, sharing stories of mistreatment by law enforcement and demanding answers. Some spoke passionately, their voices trembling with emotion. Others remained calm but firm, outlining specific incidents and calling for action. Alden listened with an expression that alternated between feigned interest and thinly veiled impatience. When it was finally his turn to speak, he launched into a rehearsed speech about community collaboration and mutual respect, avoiding any direct acknowledgement of the grievances aired. Maya sat near the back of the room, taking notes and observing the dynamics at play. She admired the courage of those who spoke out, but couldn't help feeling frustrated by Alden's evasiveness. As the Q&A session opened, she hesitated for a moment before raising her hand. When called upon, she stood up, clutching the microphone tightly. "Councilman Alden," she began, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling inside her. "You talk about mutual respect, but how can we trust that you're listening when so many complaints have gone unanswered? People are hurting, and they need real solutions, not empty promises." Her question drew murmurs of agreement from the audience, but Alden's response was dismissive. "Young lady," he said, leaning forward slightly, "change takes time. We can't overhaul an entire system overnight just because a few individuals feel slighted." His tone was condescending, almost patronizing, and Maya felt a surge of anger. Before she could respond, someone else stepped forward to ask a follow-up question, shifting the focus away from her. Frustrated but determined, Maya decided to leave the forum early. The room was packed, and maneuvering through the crowd proved challenging. As she made her way toward the exit, she found herself momentarily squeezed between bodies, unable to move freely. In that brief moment, her arm accidentally brushed against Alden's sleeve as he stood near the edge of the stage chatting with another attendee. It was a fleeting touch, barely noticeable, but it happened nonetheless. Unbeknownst to Maya, this minor incident would soon spiral out of control. Moments later, two uniformed officers approached her outside the library, their expressions grim. Without warning, they grabbed her arms and twisted them behind her back, snapping handcuffs into place. "What are you doing?" Maya exclaimed, panic rising in her chest. "I didn't do anything." Ignoring her protests, the officers shoved her into the back of a squad car, leaving her stunned and terrified. As word of her arrest spread through the crowd, confusion turned to outrage. Witnesses insisted they saw nothing aggressive or threatening about Maya's behavior, yet the officers refused to listen. Her phone was confiscated, cutting off her only means of contacting her family or seeking legal help. Back at the station, Maya was booked on charges of assaulting a public official, a claim so absurd it left her reeling. How could simply brushing against someone lead to this? Though shaken, Maya resolved to stay strong. She reminded herself of the lessons her parents had taught her, to stand tall in the face of adversity and never let fear silence her voice. Little did she know, this was just the beginning of a long and harrowing journey, one that would test her resolve, expose deep-seated injustices, and ultimately transform her into a symbol of hope and resilience. The night air was cool as Maya sat in the back of the squad car, her heart pounding like a drum. The handcuffs dug into her wrists, and every bump in the road sent sharp jolts through her body. She tried to steady her breathing, but panic kept creeping in. What had just happened? One moment she was leaving a community forum, frustrated but hopeful that her voice might spark some change. The next, she was being treated like a criminal. For what? Accidentally brushing against someone's arm? It didn't make sense. Nothing about this situation made sense. As the car pulled into the police station, Maya's mind raced. She thought about her parents, how they worked long hours to give her and her brother a better life. They always told her to stay calm and think clearly when things got tough, but right now, clarity felt impossible. Would they even know where she was? Her phone was gone, confiscated by the officers who arrested her. She imagined her mother pacing the living room, wondering why Maya hadn't come home yet. And her little brother. What would he think if he heard his big sister had been taken away in handcuffs? Inside the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an unforgiving glow on the cold, gray walls. Maya was led to a small, cramped holding area where other detainees sat slumped on benches, their faces blank with exhaustion or defiance. The officers ignored her questions, barking orders instead. "Sit down and shut up," one of them snapped, shoving her onto a hard plastic chair. Maya bit her tongue, knowing it wouldn't help to argue. Not here, not now. But inside, her frustration boiled over. How could they treat her like this without even explaining what she supposedly did wrong? Hours passed. Or maybe it only felt that way. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Maya waited, her stomach churning with hunger and anxiety. Finally, a detective appeared, sliding a folder across the table in front of her. "You're in serious trouble," he said, his tone icy. "Assaulting a public official is no joke. You're lucky we're letting you explain yourself before we throw the book at you." Maya stared at him, dumbfounded. Assault? That word hit her like a punch to the gut. She hadn't assaulted anyone. All she'd done was accidentally touch Councilman Alden's sleeve while trying to leave a crowded room. "I didn't mean to touch him," Maya insisted, her voice trembling. "It was an accident. There were so many people around, it wasn't intentional." The detective leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "That's not what we've been told," he replied. "Witnesses say you were confrontational, aggressive even. Councilman Alden claims you deliberately provoked him." Maya's jaw dropped. Provoked him? Was this man hearing himself? She hadn't raised her voice, let alone laid a finger on him. Yet somehow her simple question during the forum had turned into aggression, and an accidental brush of her arm had become assault. Despite her protests, the detective refused to listen. He rattled off legal jargon, talking about charges and bail hearings as though Maya were already guilty. Every attempt she made to clarify the truth was met with skepticism or outright dismissal. It was infuriating and terrifying. For the first time, Maya truly understood what people meant when they talked about feeling powerless against the system. No matter how calmly she explained herself, no one seemed willing to believe her. Word of her arrest spread quickly. Outside the station, friends and acquaintances gathered, demanding answers. Some had seen Maya at the forum and knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Others had heard rumors and came out of curiosity, only to find themselves outraged by what they learned. Social media lit up with posts about the incident, hashtags like "Song Justice for Maya" trending within hours. Supporters shared photos of Maya from school events and community gatherings, painting a picture of a bright, compassionate young woman who cared deeply about making the world a better place. But not everyone rallied behind her. In online comment sections and local chat groups, skeptics questioned whether Maya's race played a role in her treatment. If she were white, would this have happened? One person asked. Another pointed out that Councilman Alden had a history of targeting marginalized communities, using his influence to silence critics. These conversations added fuel to the growing fire of outrage, drawing attention from activists and journalists alike. Yet for all the noise outside, Maya remained trapped inside, unable to see or hear any of it. Eventually, she was allowed to make a single phone call. Her hands shook as she dialed her mother's number, praying she'd pick up. When her mom answered, relief flooded Maya's voice, but it was short-lived. Hearing her daughter's story brought tears to her mother's eyes. "Don't worry, baby," she said, her voice breaking. "We'll figure this out. I promise." Though comforting, those words couldn't erase the reality of Maya's situation. She was stuck in a system that seemed determined to punish her, regardless of the truth. Later that night, after more questioning and paperwork, Maya was transferred to a cell. The space was tiny, barely large enough to pace in, and reeked of stale air and disinfectant. A thin mattress lay on the floor, its surface stained and worn. Exhausted and overwhelmed, Maya curled up on it, pulling her knees to her chest. Tears streamed down her face as she replayed the events of the evening in her mind. How had this happened? Why was she being treated like a dangerous criminal for something so trivial? Sleep eluded her. Every sound, the clanging of metal doors, the distant murmur of voices, kept her on edge. Her thoughts drifted to her dreams of becoming an advocate, of fighting for justice on behalf of others. Now, she realized bitterly, she might need someone to fight for her. But who would step up? Who would believe her side of the story when the odds were stacked so heavily against her? As dawn broke, pale light filtered through the high barred window of her cell. Maya sat up, wiping her face with the sleeve of her sweater. She knew she couldn't give up, not yet. If there was one thing her parents had taught her, it was resilience. No matter how hard things got, they always found a way to push forward. Maya decided then and there that she would do the same. She didn't know what lay ahead, court dates, lawyers, judges, but she vowed to face it head on. Whatever it took, she would prove her innocence and expose the truth. Because deep down, she believed that justice still existed somewhere, even if it felt impossibly far away right now. The morning light streaming through the narrow window of her cell did little to lift Maya's spirits. She had spent most of the night replaying the events in her mind, trying to piece together how such a minor incident could spiral so wildly, out of control. Her frustration was matched only by her determination. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong, but proving that to people who seemed intent on seeing her as guilty felt like an insurmountable challenge. By mid-morning, Maya was escorted from her cell to a small courtroom for her bail hearing. The room was modest, with wooden benches lining the walls and a raised platform where the judge would sit. It wasn't the grand courthouse she'd seen in movies. Instead, it felt cramped and impersonal, a stark reminder of how quickly lives could be upended within its four walls. As she took her seat beside a public defender assigned to her case, Maya scanned the room. A few reporters sat scribbling notes in the back, while members of the community filled the benches, their faces a mix of concern and disbelief. Judge Evelyn Harper entered shortly after, her presence commanding immediate attention. Known for her stern demeanor and strict rulings, Judge Harper had earned a reputation over the years as someone who rarely showed leniency. Her sharp eyes swept across the room before settling on Maya. For a moment, Maya felt as though she were being sized up, not as a person but as a statistic or a headline. The thought sent a chill down her spine. The prosecutor wasted no time laying out their case. With practiced precision, he painted Maya as a threat, using language designed to evoke fear and distrust. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and authoritative, "the defendant not only disrespected a public official, but also physically assaulted him in front of witnesses. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated, especially when it involves someone in a position of authority." He went on to describe the alleged attack in vivid detail, making it sound far more aggressive than it actually was. By the time he finished, anyone unfamiliar with the truth might have believed Maya had stormed the stage and attacked Alden with malicious intent. Maya listened intently, her fists clenched tightly in her lap. Each word felt like another layer of injustice piling onto her shoulders. When her public defender finally stood to speak, she hoped for some relief, but what followed was equally disheartening. Overwhelmed by a heavy caseload and limited resources, the lawyer struggled to mount a convincing defense. His arguments were rushed and disjointed, lacking the passion and preparation needed to counter the prosecution's narrative. At one point, he even stumbled over basic facts about the case, leaving Maya feeling increasingly abandoned by the very system meant to protect her. Throughout the hearing, Judge Harper remained impassive, her expression giving nothing away. When it came time to rule on bail, she spoke firmly. "Given the nature of the charges and the potential flight risk, I see no reason to grant bail at this time," she declared. Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by murmurs of outrage. Maya's heart sank. No bail meant staying locked up indefinitely until her trial, a prospect that felt both suffocating and surreal. As the gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the hearing, Maya's mother rose from her seat, tears streaming down her face. Her brother clutched her hand tightly, his young face etched with anger and confusion. Maya wanted to comfort them, to tell them everything would be okay, but the distance between them felt impossibly wide. Officers ushered her out of the courtroom before she could say a word, leaving her family behind in a haze of despair. Back in her cell, Maya replayed the hearing in her mind, dissecting every detail. She couldn't shake the feeling that the entire process had been rigged against her from the start. The prosecutor's inflammatory language, the judge's lack of empathy, and her own lawyer's ineffectiveness all pointed to a system that didn't care about fairness. It cared about maintaining power dynamics, and as a young black woman, Maya realized she was caught in the crosshairs of biases that had existed long before her arrest. Despite the bleakness of her situation, Maya refused to let despair consume her. She thought back to the stories her parents used to share, stories of resilience in the face of adversity, of ancestors who endured unimaginable hardships yet still managed to rise above. They had taught her to find strength in struggle, to use her pain as fuel for change. Now, trapped in a cell and stripped of her freedom, Maya vowed to honor those lessons. If the system wouldn't give her justice willingly, she would fight for it tooth and nail. Over the next few days, Maya began reaching out to anyone who might help. Letters poured into the jail from supporters, offering words of encouragement and promises to amplify her story. Journalists called the station repeatedly, demanding access to interview her. Activists organized rallies outside the courthouse, holding signs that read, "Justice for Maya," and chanting slogans about equality and reform. Though isolated physically, Maya started to feel connected to something larger than herself, a movement determined to shine a light on the injustices she faced. Meanwhile, legal teams specializing in wrongful convictions took notice of her case. One prominent civil rights attorney reached out to her family, offering to represent Maya pro bono. His name was Marcus Reed, a seasoned lawyer known for taking on high-profile cases involving systemic racism and police misconduct. When Maya met him during a visitation session, she felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in days. Marcus listened attentively as she recounted the events leading to her arrest, nodding thoughtfully and asking probing questions. Unlike her previous lawyer, he seemed genuinely invested in uncovering the truth. "We're going to expose what really happened here," Marcus assured her, his tone firm yet reassuring. "But it won't be easy. You'll need to stay strong, because they're going to try to break you. Don't let them." Maya nodded, resolve hardening in her chest. She understood the road ahead wouldn't be smooth, but she was ready to walk it, if only to prove that she deserved better than the treatment she'd received. In the weeks that followed, Marcus worked tirelessly to build a defense. He filed motions challenging the prosecution's evidence, sought witness testimonies from the forum attendees, and dug into Councilman Alden's background, uncovering a trail of questionable actions that painted him in a less than flattering light. Slowly but surely, cracks began to form in the narrative constructed against Maya. Still, the weight of uncertainty loomed large. Would the appeals work? Could they sway a jury that might already view her through prejudiced lenses? These questions haunted Maya daily, but she pushed them aside whenever doubt crept in. Instead, she focused on staying grounded, leaning on the support of her loved ones and the growing chorus of voices advocating for her release. One evening, as she lay on the thin mattress in her cell, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed in such a short time. Just weeks ago, she'd been an ordinary college student dreaming of a future filled with purpose. Now she was fighting for her freedom, thrust into a battle far bigger than herself. Yet amidst the chaos and fear, there was clarity too. Maya realized that her experience wasn't just about her. It was about every person who had ever been wronged by a biased system. If she could survive this, if she could emerge victorious, maybe she could inspire others to keep pushing for change. With that thought, Maya closed her eyes, letting sleep take her for the first time in days. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of peace, knowing she wasn't alone in this fight. The day of Maya's trial arrived with a heaviness that seemed to settle over the entire town. Outside the courthouse, crowds gathered early in the morning, holding signs and chanting slogans like "Justice for Maya" and "No more racist systems." Supporters from across the country had traveled to show their solidarity, turning what might have been a quiet legal proceeding into a national spectacle. Inside, however, the atmosphere was tense and formal, a stark contrast to the energy outside. Reporters jostled for seats in the gallery, cameras clicking as lawyers shuffled papers and whispered last-minute strategies. Maya sat at the defense table, dressed in borrowed clothes that were slightly too big but clean and pressed. She looked calm on the surface, though her hands gripped the edge of the table tightly beneath it. Beside her, Marcus Reed exuded confidence, his sharp suit and steady demeanor offering a small measure of reassurance. Across the aisle, the prosecution team huddled together, flipping through documents and exchanging smug glances. Councilman James Alden himself sat in the front row, flanked by aides who whispered urgently in his ear. He wore a look of practiced concern, occasionally nodding solemnly when reporters turned their lenses toward him. As the judge entered the courtroom and called the proceedings to order, Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself for what lay ahead. The prosecutor rose first, launching into an opening statement that painted her as reckless and dangerous. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he began, his voice smooth and deliberate, "what happened that night wasn't just an accident. It was an act of defiance against authority. The defendant knowingly and intentionally assaulted a public official, disrupting a peaceful event and undermining the very fabric of our community." He went on to describe the incident in dramatic detail, exaggerating every movement Maya made during the forum. According to him, she hadn't simply brushed against Alden. She had lunged at him aggressively, violating his personal space and humiliating him in front of witnesses. Security footage was played, grainy and out of context, but carefully edited to support this narrative. In the video, Maya appeared to step forward suddenly, though anyone familiar with the crowded room would know she was merely trying to navigate her way out. When it was Marcus's turn to speak, he stood tall, addressing the jury with clarity and conviction. "This case isn't about assault or disrespect," he said firmly. "It's about power. Who has it, who abuses it, and who gets punished for challenging it. My client, Maya Johnson, is a young woman who dared to ask questions, to hold those in positions of authority accountable. And because of that, she's being targeted by a system that fears accountability." Marcus outlined his strategy, exposing the flaws in the prosecution's case, highlighting the lack of credible evidence, and demonstrating how racial bias had influenced every step of the process. He promised to call witnesses who could testify to Maya's character and explain the true nature of the incident. As he spoke, Maya felt a flicker of hope. For the first time since her arrest, someone was telling her story, not as a series of accusations, but as a human experience. Over the next several days, the courtroom became a battleground of narratives. The prosecution called its witnesses first, starting with Councilman Alden himself. Dressed impeccably and speaking with rehearsed sincerity, Alden described feeling threatened by Maya's presence. "I've always welcomed open dialogue," he claimed. "But Ms. Johnson crossed a line. Her behavior was hostile, disrespectful, and ultimately violent." His testimony was polished, designed to sway the jury's emotions rather than rely on facts. Next came the officers who arrested Maya. They recounted the events of that night with alarming precision, painting her as combative and uncooperative, despite multiple attendees confirming otherwise. One officer even claimed Maya had shouted profanities, a blatant lie that made Marcus bristle visibly. When cross-examined, the inconsistencies in their stories began to emerge, but whether the jury noticed remained unclear. The defense team countered with its own witnesses, including several people who had attended the forum. A middle-aged woman named Karen stepped up first, describing how chaotic the room had been. "There were so many people packed in there," she explained. "You couldn't move without bumping into someone. I saw Maya try to leave. And yes, her arm touched Councilman Alden's sleeve, but it was completely accidental. There was no aggression, no hostility, just an innocent mistake." Another witness, a college student named Jamal, echoed Karen's account. "Maya asked a tough question, sure, but she did it respectfully. That's all she wanted, to get answers. None of us expected her to be treated like a criminal afterward." Their testimonies added weight to Maya's side, yet the prosecution worked hard to undermine them, questioning their credibility and motives. Throughout the trial, Maya remained composed, though the emotional toll was evident. Each day brought new challenges, harsh cross-examinations, dismissive remarks from the prosecution, and the looming presence of Alden, whose smug expression never wavered. Yet she found strength in the faces of her supporters, the activists rallying outside, the journalists documenting every twist, and most importantly, her family sitting steadfastly in the front row. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while her younger brother scribbled notes furiously, determined to remember every detail. One particularly pivotal moment came when Marcus introduced evidence uncovered during his investigation. Documents revealed that Alden had a history of targeting critics, using his influence to silence dissent. Text messages between Alden and local law enforcement suggested coordination in framing Maya as a threat. Though the prosecution dismissed these findings as irrelevant, the jury appeared intrigued, leaning forward slightly as Marcus presented each piece of information. As closing arguments approached, tensions reached a fever pitch. The prosecutor delivered a fiery speech urging the jury to protect society from individuals like Maya, whom he portrayed as dangerous radicals bent on undermining authority. Marcus, however, delivered a masterful rebuttal. "This isn't about protecting authority, it's about justice," he declared passionately. "Justice means holding people accountable, regardless of their title or status. It means recognizing when power is misused and standing up for those who are vulnerable. Today, you have the opportunity to do just that." When the judge finally instructed the jury to deliberate, Maya felt a mix of relief and dread. The waiting game began, hours stretching into days as the jury debated behind closed doors. Outside the courthouse, protests continued, drawing larger crowds each day. Online, hashtags supporting Maya trended worldwide, with celebrities and politicians joining the call for fairness. Inside, Maya tried to stay hopeful, clinging to the belief that truth would prevail. Finally, after 3 agonizing days, the jury returned with a verdict. As the foreperson stood to announce the decision, the courtroom fell silent. Every eye turned toward Maya, who sat perfectly still, her heart pounding in her chest. The word that followed would change everything, for better or worse. The courtroom was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. Every person in the room seemed to hold their breath as the foreperson stood, clutching a slip of paper that held Maya's fate in its folds. The judge nodded solemnly, signaling for the verdict to be read. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, her voice steady but tinged with an unspoken weight, "find the defendant, Maya Johnson, guilty." The words hit like a thunderclap, reverberating through the room and landing squarely on Maya's chest. For a moment she felt nothing, just a strange numbness, as if her mind refused to process what had just been said. Then came the gasps from the gallery, the murmured protests, the stifled sobs of her mother sitting just a few feet away. Her brother clenched his fists so tightly his knuckles turned white, while Marcus Reed closed his eyes briefly, exhaling sharply through his nose. Maya blinked, trying to steady herself. She had known this outcome was possible. It loomed over her like a shadow throughout the trial. But hearing it aloud made it feel real in a way she hadn't prepared for. Guilty. The word echoed in her mind, heavy and suffocating. How could they call her guilty when she knew deep down that she hadn't done anything wrong? But the jury's decision wasn't swayed by truth or fairness. It was shaped by bias, by fear, by a system that valued power over justice. The judge wasted no time moving to sentencing. With a grave expression, she reviewed the charges and listened as the prosecution argued for maximum punishment. "Your Honor," the prosecutor said, his tone dripping with self-righteous indignation, "this is not just about one incident, it's about sending a message. We cannot allow individuals to disrespect authority figures without consequence. A strong sentence will deter others from behaving similarly." His words were calculated, designed to paint Maya as a threat rather than a victim of circumstance. Marcus countered passionately, pleading for leniency. "Your Honor, my client is a young woman with her whole life ahead of her. She has never been in trouble before, nor does she pose any danger to society. What happened that night was a misunderstanding blown wildly out of proportion. To impose a harsh sentence would be a grave miscarriage of justice." He spoke with conviction, his voice rising slightly as he emphasized each point, but the judge remained unmoved. After a brief pause, Judge Harper delivered the sentence. 5 years. In prison for misdemeanor assault, a punishment widely considered excessive given the nature of the offense. The room erupted in chaos. Supporters shouted objections, some standing up in protest while reporters scrambled to capture the reaction. Maya's mother let out a wail, collapsing into tears while her brother yelled, "This isn't fair," before being pulled back into his seat by a friend. Through it all, Maya stayed eerily calm. She sat upright, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, staring straight ahead as if willing herself to stay composed. Inside, however, emotions churned, violently. Anger, sadness, frustration. They all swirled together, threatening to overwhelm her. Yet something else emerged too. Resolve. She wouldn't let this break her. If the system wanted to punish her unfairly, then she would use every ounce of strength to prove them wrong, not just for herself, but for everyone else who might face similar injustices. As bailiffs led her out of the courtroom, Maya caught sight of her family one last time. Her mother reached out desperately, tears streaming down her face, mouthing the words, "I love you," over and over again. Maya nodded, forcing a small smile despite the lump in her throat. She couldn't speak, couldn't reassure them that everything would be okay, because she didn't know if it would be. All she could do was walk forward, step by step, into whatever lay ahead. Outside the courthouse, the crowd reacted with fury. Protesters chanted louder, holding signs that now read 5 years for what? And systemic racism at work. Journalists interviewed attendees, capturing raw emotion and outrage. Social media exploded once again with hashtags like Free Maya Now, spreading across platforms. Celebrities and activists joined the conversation, amplifying calls for accountability and reform. It was clear that Maya's case had struck a nerve, exposing deep flaws in the justice system and sparking widespread demand for change. Back inside, Marcus Reed addressed the media, vowing to appeal the verdict. "This is not the end," he declared, his voice firm and resolute. "We will fight this injustice every step of the way. Maya Johnson deserves better than this sham of a trial, and we won't rest until she gets the justice she deserves." His words resonated with supporters, reigniting hope even as despair threatened to take hold. Meanwhile, Maya was transported back to jail to await transfer to a state correctional facility. The ride was quiet, save for the occasional crackle of the officer's radio. Maya stared out the window, watching the world blur past. Trees, buildings, people, all of it seemed distant, almost unreal. She thought about her dreams, the future she had envisioned for herself. College, activism, making a difference. Those aspirations felt impossibly far away now. But even as doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she couldn't give up. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about fighting for a better world, one where no one else would have to endure what she was going through. When she arrived at the women's prison, reality set in fully. The facility was cold and impersonal, its gray walls lined with barred windows and heavy doors. Inmates shuffled along narrow hallways, their faces weary and hardened by time. Maya was processed quickly, handed a uniform, and assigned a bunk in a shared cell. Her new roommate, a woman named Tasha, greeted her cautiously, sizing her up before offering a tentative smile. "Welcome to the jungle," Tasha said dryly, gesturing to the cramped space around them. Adjusting to life behind bars proved challenging. Days blended together in a monotonous routine of meals, counts, and limited recreation time. Guards patrolled constantly, their presence a constant reminder of Maya's lack of freedom. Some inmates treated her with suspicion, wary of her education and background. Others saw her as an outsider, someone whose privileged upbringing made her unfit for prison life. But Maya refused to let negativity consume her. Instead, she focused on finding ways to make a difference even within the confines of her situation. She started small, organizing informal study sessions during free time. Using scraps of paper and borrowed books, she helped fellow inmates practice reading and writing. Word spread quickly, and soon women from different blocks began joining in. They shared stories, laughed together, and supported one another through the hardships of incarceration. For many, these moments of connection became lifelines, reminders that humanity still existed even in such a dehumanizing environment. Letters poured in from supporters outside, filling Maya's mailbox with messages of encouragement and solidarity. Teachers wrote to thank her for inspiring their students. Activists sent updates on rallies and petitions demanding her release. Friends promised to keep fighting for her, ensuring her story stayed in the public eye. Each letter buoyed her spirits, reminding her that she wasn't alone. One envelope, in particular, stood out. It contained a handwritten note from her little brother filled with sketches and doodles. "Don't worry, sis," he wrote. "I'm telling everyone your story. You're my hero, and I'll make sure the world knows it." Reading those words brought tears to Maya's eyes, but they also strengthened her resolve. If her brother believed in her, if strangers thousands of miles away believed in her, then she owed it to them, and to herself, to keep pushing forward. Months passed, and Maya settled into a rhythm, finding purpose in helping others and staying connected to the movement growing outside. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, she clung to hope. Somewhere, somehow justice would prevail. And when it did, Maya vowed to use her experience to create lasting change, not just for herself, but for everyone trapped in a system stacked against them.